Welcome to Dental Brain Crops. I'm your host, Chelsea Myers, and today I'm joined with Perrin DesPortes of Polaris Healthcare Partners. Perrin, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Hey, Chelsea, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. I've really been looking forward to this for a while, so I appreciate it.
Me too. I'm so excited. Well, just if you would, just give our audience a little bit of a history on you and then some on Polaris as well.
Yeah, happy to do it. And I'll try to be brief, but I mean, you could sort of say I was born into the business side of dentistry. I was fourth generation in a dental distribution company, family-owned company called Thompson Dental Company that was started in 1899 by my great grandfather James Perrin Thompson, and my father
Wow.
was, yeah. So I mean, I'm sure you've read a lot. Knowing the work that you do, you've read a lot about businesses and family generational businesses, and most of them don't survive the second generation. It's a
Right.
very few that get through three, and even less, obviously, that get through four. And so I joined that business shortly after college in 1995. My dad was president and CEO. My grandfather was chairman of the board. Um, I guess I'm kind of biased, but I would like to think that it was a very well-run business and, was growing very quickly in the world of dental distribution. It's about $100 million run rate in revenue. We had 13 or 14 sales offices, if memory serves me correct, from Baltimore through Orlando, and the company was headquartered in Columbia, South Carolina, where I grew up. It was growing quickly, employed about 400 people or so, and really had a lot of upside to it. Um, the challenge in a family-held business is that it's an illiquid investment, so to speak. And my father has two younger sisters, neither of whom worked in the business, nor did their husbands, nor did any of their children. And upon my grandfather's ultimate demise, his estate was set up to be share and share alike. So I wasn't a math major undergrad, but I can do some quick fractions and figure out that, if my dad is president and CEO, but only owns a third of the business, and two other people each own a third who don't work in the business, don't want to work in the business, and aren't going to work in the business, there comes a point where you kind of get outvoted. And so
Right.
I learned a lot about ownership, equity, family businesses, leadership. Family business is never what you think it is from the outside looking in. People on the outside think it's one thing. Sort of being behind the curtain, I would tell you it's significantly different and it has a lot of challenges. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of families or family-held businesses don't last. But in any event, in April of 2002, we made the decision to sell that business to Patterson, not for financial or operational reasons. Like I say, the company was growing quite nicely, but due to that poor equity transition planning. And it was a great acquisition for Patterson. They still look back on it very fondly 20 some odd years later. And I was fortunate enough to kind of parlay that into a 15-year career where I ran three different businesses for them. And I always say I would have loved to have worked for my dad longer than the 7 years that I did, but I also had a wonderful opportunity at Patterson that I probably wouldn't have gotten if I had stayed in the family business. And they gave me a lot of opportunity at a really early stage. I ran three different businesses. I had full P&L responsibility from the age of about 31 on, and I didn't know what
Mm-hmm.
that meant at the time, or else I probably wouldn't have taken the job. But I did and did pretty well. And ran Richmond, Virginia, Metro, New York, New Jersey, and then Charlotte, North Carolina for the last 7 years of that career. And I was in my mid 40s. Had Charlotte branch had won multiple awards. Was kind of at the top of that career for me, and I had kind of an inflection point. And I was newly married at the time, and my wife and I had a newly born daughter, and my wife is an ophthalmologist, part of a great group here in Charlotte, and you know I wasn't going. We weren't going to uproot the family and move to Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to do that for a lot of reasons. Growing up in South Carolina, I'm not built for that, but I
Yeah.
certainly wasn't going to do that then. At the same time, I didn't want to be a regional and live on an airplane. Pack a bag on a Monday morning and come home on Friday, that kind of thing. So, you start thinking it through, and you're like, well, Perrin, that sort of sounds like a you problem, not a Patterson problem, you know? So
Yeah.
I decided to leave Patterson in January of 2017 and launched a venture with a couple of industry colleagues who I knew called Tusk Partners. And Tusk was a startup venture in early 17 that focused our efforts exclusively with group dental practices, helping them to start, grow, and sell their businesses. Diwakar Sinha, one of those co-founding partners, and I decided to leave Tusk back in March of 2021, so about a year and a half ago, to launch
Mhm.
Polaris. We replicated that business at Polaris, and I know we'll dig into some of the dynamics around group practices and everything, but the group practice space that we operate in, that we call doctor founded and debt funded. It's the entrepreneurs who happen to be dentists that want to own multiple locations. So it's pre-private equity, but it's beyond 1 to 2 locations. It's the fastest growing segment of the space. It's the space that arguably needs the most business guidance, strategic guidance, and that's a lot of what we do. And if those entrepreneurs build their business to some level of success and they want to take some chips off the table and either sell it outright or find a capital partner like a private equity group, we're equipped to do just that. And our longer term vision for Polaris, and the reason we call it Polaris Healthcare Partners and not Polaris Dental Partners, is that we think if we develop that kind of suite of services in dentistry, the core business that we know really, really well, we can maybe replicate it into other healthcare verticals like ophthalmology or optometry or podiatry or behavioral health, or there are a lot of
Mhm.
others that are kind of physician practice model that have some of the same characteristics of the dental industry. So that's a little bit of the longer term vision. I hope that was concise enough not to be boring for your audience, but
Not
that's
boring
my
at
story.
all. Yeah, not boring at all. Thank you. That's good background. So help me know. You said it's the fastest growing, yet in need of the most guidance and support. So talk to me more about the specifics of those smaller groups.
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of this really started germinating, and we started seeing more of it after the economic collapse, the housing collapse of '08 and '09. I mean, I know the trends were underway at the time. You obviously had Heartland Dental and Pacific Dental and Aspen and North American Dental Group and Dental Care Alliance and all those that are private equity backed enterprise level groups. They've been in existence for a long time. But I think really in the late, or early 20 teens, late 20 aughts, you started seeing a lot of entrepreneurs who there always have been specialists that own multiple locations, but they kind of split their time in those locations. And then you
Mm-hmm.
started seeing a lot of general dentists that wanted to own more than one location, and they wanted to employ associates or have multiple partners in them. And to their credit, they saw that they wanted to build a business that wasn't 100% dependent upon their clinical skill set. You know,
Okay.
dentists to a great degree make a good bit of money, but most of them are the economic engine of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if they take a vacation, if they want to go to Europe for 90 days, if they go out on maternity leave or something like that, the business isn't generating revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us who are entrepreneurs didn't become entrepreneurs to build a job. We became entrepreneurs, to build a
Yeah.
business and ultimately be able to make money when we're not necessarily practicing our craft. And I think a lot of people started seeing that, going back a decade or more. And then you kind of got this wave of, a couple of people did it and did it successfully. And then you started hearing about these things like private equity investment or the exit side of it. And then it was, holy cow, wait, I know that person. I went to dental school with that person. That person just sold their business for what? And now it was on everybody's radar. And well, if they're, I went to dental school with that guy and he wasn't that bright. So if he did it, I'm going to do it too, and
Right.
and just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you should do it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
never the right reason to build a business. So I would also say that there are a lot of dental practice management consultants that work at an operational level, clinic level, with a lot of solo dentists on case acceptance and scheduling efficiencies and hygiene retention and culture building and a lot of these other things that are really mission critical at a practice level, but that's not scale. You have to have that to be successful in a solo practice. But what gets you from one or two locations to 8 to 10 has to be something different, or it is
Hmm.
something different. And so we saw, um, a void in the marketplace in terms of strategic guidance, how to use bank funds to grow, how to create equity opportunities for associates. How do you buy or build businesses and not make fatal mistakes along the way, literally stepping on a landmine? And so
Hmm.
that was the thing that nobody was solving for these entrepreneurs. And so DeWalker and I really felt like, you know, we had worked at corporate America companies, and we had built businesses. And while I was involved in distribution, he was involved in healthcare lending. So he kind of saw it from the banking side of things. And we just decided to say, look, okay, somebody's got to help these entrepreneurs at a minimum not make fatal mistakes in their early stages. And if we can just show them what not to do and maybe accelerate their learning curve a little bit, they have a better opportunity for success. And what we know in terms of being entrepreneurs ourselves is how to build and scale a business, and that's our primary focus for that core client. And then the ancillary focus is the transactional side upon finding a capital partner or exiting the business.
Hmm. Yeah, and you touched on some really important things there. And one of the things that came to mind is, when you're looking around and you're like, I went to school with that person and they just sold for that amount. It brought to mind how many times I've heard somebody say, my dental buddy just did this, so therefore he's my consultant on how to do that. And do you see that too?
Yeah, I mean, s- that that can work sometimes. Just like you
Sometimes.
say, yeah. I mean, you know, as antithetical as this may sound, when somebody comes to us and asks us about, you know, building a group practice, we try to talk them out of it. And I know
Okay.
that's stupid for somebody who owns a business that helps them grow. Like your first order of business is to land a client, not like talk them out of doing what you do, you know? I mean, it would be like going to a dentist and a dentist telling you, Chelsea, don't worry about brushing your teeth. It's not, you don't need to come back for your hygiene appointments, just when your tooth falls out, then come to see me. Like that would be stupid, So who
Right.
builds a business this way? But I think the reason we kind of take that approach is because we know how hard it is. It
Hmm.
is not a journey for the faint of heart, and we've seen, um, people create a lot of failure in partnerships, and
Hmm.
we've seen a lot of people create a lot of um, unnecessary stress and anxiety because, for example, they overpaid for a business they wanted to buy. It's not generating the returns that they thought it would, or their characteristics that they didn't identify in the due diligence phase that led half the staff to walk off, or something like that. The bank's going to get paid. You may not, but
Hmm.
the bank will. And so now we see that, well, I was making $300,000 personal income in my core practice. It was going really, really great. And now I own three locations and I'm making two and a quarter. Like, how is that possible? So,
Right.
so these are the things that every business, we take kind of a unique approach to every business because we really want to understand what that entrepreneur wants out of the business, what their expectations are, and what the time frame is. And we
Hmm.
quantify that. A lot of what we do is analytically driven and financial model based. So you can have the greatest vision in the world, but if I put it into a spreadsheet and the numbers don't add up, then we got to adjust something. So going back to your question about I got a buddy who did it and they were successful, so now they're my consultant. Well, they're successful, give them credit for that. But you may not want to build the same business that they did the way they did it. Or you might not be predisposed to want to take the risk that they did along the way. your outcome might be of totally different expectations than theirs. And that's why this is not McDonald's. There's not a cookbook, okay? I mean,
Uh-huh.
everything is slightly different, every market's slightly different, and you got challenges all across the board, and how you solve them can be somewhat unique to the founder and what their predispositions are. So it's not a formulaic approach that, wash, rinse, repeat, and you'll have success. I mean, it really needs to be a
Mm-hmm.
lot of forethought, a lot of gut check, a lot of face in the mirror tests around what's your stress tolerance? How much debt do you want to take on? How many hours a week are you going to work? What do you want your role to be? Clinical, leadership, combination of both. Is this a build for exit business, or is it a lifestyle business that generates, $1 million in passive income? Do you want to own it all,
Right.
keep it small? Do you want to have multiple partners, herd the cats? There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different aspects to this, and you think about like that decision tree analysis of all the variables you need to work through. It would probably be better to try to work through a lot of those up front so you know what you're building versus just taking each one of them in isolation as they present themselves.
Yep. That makes so much sense. And you hit on exactly where I was going with that because what I see, and I'm sure you see this too, is two things happen. Either there's a lack of clarity around what is actually wanted for a number of reasons, maybe not even asking ourselves the right questions, not having the right data, or maybe you do know what you want, but there's not a lot of clarity around your reasons. And so we make these emotional based decisions or impulsive decisions for it's in alignment with your goal, but it's bad timing or it's poor, it's not the right opportunity.
You're 100% correct. And I know the work that you do, and being as close with your clients as you are, um, you know, ego is a bad motivator to build a business. Okay. And I
Yeah.
mean, look, none of us do what we do for free. I'm every bit as ego driven as you are. We like
Mm-hmm.
the trappings of success. We like to see our name in lights and all that other kind of stuff, right? I get it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you don't have an ego, you're probably not going to be a successful entrepreneur. I'm not sure about that, but that's probably the case. But at the
Probably.
same time, you get this if you're comparing yourself against somebody who's already had like an exit, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all bragging at the 19th hole on the golf course after a couple of beers about the transaction value and the multiples of millions and you know, well, I'm going to do that too. And there's a lot of there's a lot of ground between probably where you are and what that finish line might look like. And again, being as kind of analytically oriented as we are, when we start, when somebody says, "Hey, Perrin, I've got 3 locations generating $500,000 in EBITDA, and I want to build a business that I'm going to exit for, a net $20 million walkaway number in 5 years," and
Mm-hmm.
I say, okay, that sounds great to me. Let's see what the numbers say. And then we model it out. And the model says, well, based on where you are right now and the amount of debt funds you're going to take on and the characteristics type of business you're going to buy to yield some type of transaction that pays off debt, pays off taxes, and puts $20 million in your bank account, and to do it in 5 years, all you have to do is buy or build 18 practices a year. How does that sound? And
Uh-huh.
then all of a sudden they kind of get like the deer in the headlights look, and that's the reality check. Okay, so is the vision off, or is the goal unrealistic, or is the time frame unrealistic? You can
Mm-hmm.
build a business that's a $20 million exit or whatever you want, but you might not be able to build it in 5 years based on where you are and the realistic assumptions around that growth trajectory. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of hard, cold glass of water in the face, the hard and fast reality that's like, okay, we're just modeling stuff on a spreadsheet. Now's the time to
Mm-hmm.
check the ego at the door to say, is this what we're committing to? And do
Mm-hmm.
we think it's realistic? If it's not, then what do we need to adjust? What is
Mhm.
realistic? And that's where you kind of bring down the temperature in the room a little bit, and people tend to put their ego aside and say, okay, I didn't tell you I'm also practicing clinically 4 days a week. Well, okay, why don't we
Mhm.
address that and start working up from it? So I think that type of guidance around, you know, on a white sheet of paper, anything's possible, but it doesn't mean it's realistic given certain constraints. So what are the constraints? What are we working with? How do we want this to end up? And what are your real goals in life? And oh, by the way, how does this impact your personal life?
Mhm.
Because all of us who are entrepreneurs have other commitments in life, and we all pay lip service to the fact that they're the most important things until they're not. And there are only so many hours in the day. The stress loads can be immense. It is for me. My family can bear the brunt at times on that. So I'm not immune to the guidance that I give our clients as well. But I think you have to kind of take a holistic approach, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I appreciate that approach because I think sometimes it's not so much about what we need to put into something if we're willing to put into it that amount, but it is the surprise that that's what's going to be required. And so I appreciate that that's a part of your client's journey is if this is your goal, here are your realistic stepping stones to get there. That
That's
does sound
that's
like
right.
a really valuable conversation. Okay, so we're on that journey. We've got you in place, and you're talking to us about we've got our what do we want? Why do we want it? What does it take to get there? Um, how long does this relationship usually last to get to that next point?
Um, you know, I, I would answer it this way. We we want to help our clients um, learn how to build a better business, and we want them to be confident in the business that they're operating. We do
Mm-hmm.
not want their business success or their personal success to be in any way dependent upon us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to be holier than thou or anything with this, but one of the problems that DeWalker and I or one of the aspects of the industry that DeWalker and I thought was maybe um, uh, could I'm trying to be diplomatic, could require a second look would be the fact that a lot of consultants um, work with clients forever.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do in terms of the business principles and the way we operate and the guidance we give, we're trying to accelerate a client's body of business knowledge and create a level of confidence in them that they can operate the business successfully and frankly work ourselves out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
The way we tend to work with clients, and it's a pretty intense relationship at times, but I would say our average client engagement lasts somewhere between about 12 and 18 months, depending on
Okay.
where they are in their journey, depending on what their goals are, depending on what they want to achieve, and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. There's some that we stay on longer, and there's some that we work with for less time than that. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. But our goal is not to be engaged with a client indefinitely or forever, at least not in a consulting relationship. They go through
Right.
different kind of phases of business building, and some of the challenges that they incur along the way are what's the right way to buy and build practices depending on what your growth strategy is. Are you going to acquire them? Or are you going to do a de novo approach and build them from the ground up, or a blend of both?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to build like an associate equity model where you hire young associates and allow them to either buy in or earn into the business, and what are the different
Mm-hmm.
facets of that? And depending upon how quickly you want to grow, like I mentioned in the onset, our clients are all using bank funds to grow, and
Mm-hmm.
that is the right choice beyond a shadow of a doubt. Um, Even with rates increasing, debt funds are the right way to build businesses in the emerging phase. But the banks that they probably start out with have limitations around the credit box that the bank works in at the inception when the dentist buys his or her first or second practice. They probably need to transition to a um, different lending relationship with a bank, but it would be like a lower middle market bank or a middle market bank that would allow for a greater growth facility. It's like you and I having a credit card. You know, if you go to a grocery store or the mall or something, and you're pushing around a shopping cart and you fill it full of stuff, and you go to check out, and then you have to say, well, let me call the bank and see how much stuff I can buy here. Like that would be
Mm-hmm.
crazy. We would never do that, right? You have a credit card with a credit limit, and you know what the limit is, and you can spend up to that limit if you want to. Well,
Mm-hmm.
when we do debt recapitalization services for clients, it's that exact scenario. They don't spend cash anymore out of their checking account because they know that's a finite resource. They spend credit on a credit card, just to draw an analogy, and they know
Mm-hmm.
the amount of capital they can draw from a bank on an annual basis. They know how long it takes to get an acquisition approved, and it's usually about 30 days. And they know how often that credit limit refreshes. So now they
Mm-hmm.
can go source practices to buy because they know they have a lending commitment in place versus finding a practice to buy and saying, God, I hope the bank will fund it. So it's
Right.
that debt recapitalization is another service that we offer, and these could be services kind of along the client journey, if you want to call it that. So
Mm-hmm.
some people engage us for different things at different points in time, but we want to be a multifaceted solution for a lot of the people who are building these groups, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that makes so much sense to have everything out in front of you before you start making decisions. And you touched on some growth strategies, but I know that's a big component of what you help strategize. And so, what are some of those different areas that you might discover with your client?
Yeah, I think if you can kind of break it down between, they're probably three. One would be acquiring practices. Two would be building practices from the dirt up, or a
Mm-hmm.
shell out. And then the third might be merging entities, And so I think the thing that gets people into trouble in the acquisition game um, is that they they get impatient, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And dentists or healthcare providers by nature, they're not directors of business development. And when you start talking about acquiring another practice, just because it's a practice that comes on the market for sale doesn't necessarily mean you should buy it. And if you talk to the people who run enterprise level DSOs and their business development offices, you quickly find out that they take a swing at only about 10 to 20% of the practices that come across their radar. And the reason
Mm-hmm.
for that is they're very disciplined about what they won't buy. And this is sort of, if you played baseball growing up or something like that, these are the pitches not to swing at. That's how
Mm-hmm.
you strike out. You're reaching for a pitch. It's out of the strike zone. It's something that you shouldn't take a cut at. And so
Mm-hmm.
what we find is that people either acquire practices that don't mesh with their culture or don't mesh with their systems and processes or their philosophies, or they overpay for them,
Mm-hmm.
or after they've acquired them, they can't either get the cost reductions or the revenue generation out of them to make it more profitable to allow them to cover the debt service payment. So any
Okay.
combination of that in acquisitions creates massive problems, and it manifests itself in kind of that scenario I alluded to earlier. Like I own, three times as many practices as I did before, and I'm making half as much income. How's that
Mm-hmm.
possible? Well,
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I just described. And then, on the de novo or the startup, if they're gonna, if you're a pediatric dentist, I mean, you can there's a new school or a housing development nearby, you can drop a new pediatric practice in just about anywhere you want. It's like printing money the next day. Not really, but you know, the challenge with people who are doing the de novo, the build side of growth, is that they don't really understand how to quantify success with it.
Hmm.
And by that, I mean it takes a whatever the investment is to start the business, the build out, the working capital, the hiring of the staff, the equipment and technology, the supplies, on and marketing, on and on and on, you know. And so when you make that investment in a de novo, um, the answer to making it successful is not hoping and praying, right?
Hmm.
I just hope we get patient number one to walk through the front door. No, you need to understand, you know, how the bank lends money, once again, on a de novo. What are the metrics they're looking for to lend you money on a second or a third de novo? Well,
Hmm.
they want to make sure that you're generating enough profitability and cash flow, not only to offset the debt service payments, but also to be within some leverage ratio that's predefined. So when you know
Hmm.
how the bank lends money in a de novo, and you know your patient acquisition costs and your average value of a new patient, now you can start to kind of do the math behind, okay, it cost me $500,000 to build this thing. I know what leverage ratios I need to be within to satisfy the bank. I know my cost to acquire a patient and how much they typically generate in my practice in the first year. Now I can solve for the number of new patients I need and the revenue that I need to generate. And then it
Hmm.
becomes a little bit more formulaic of working the process to understand this, how everything is interconnected with it. And when you do that, you can start doing de novos more repeatedly at scale with better systems and processes. And oh, by the way, you're cross pollinating your people from a successful practice into a new practice, and the culture translates, and the brand has continuity between locations, and all these great things about the de novo concept in and of itself. But you are a little bit more like, I'm sorry to use this term, like a McDonald's in this concept, because the box is the same, the operating process is the same, you're connected to all the numbers, you can course correct accordingly, and when you do that, your success isn't guaranteed, but you can kind of see it happening before it happens. So, you know, working with clients on how they acquire practices, how they identify them, how they size up the potential in them, you know, how they, you know, integrate them into the business, as well as on a de novo standpoint, you know, how they model out that investment to a level of success within 12 months so they can keep
Hmm.
doing it over and over is critically important. And then the third piece I mentioned, the merger concept, is one, whether it's an adjacent geography that you might merge two businesses together so it's complementary fit, or it could be something like a pediatric group and an orthodontic group merging together so it's like
Right.
complementary service offerings. You know, how do you do a cap table merger? If your business is worth 10 million and mine's worth 20 million, but I've got five partners and you're the sole owner of yours, and you know, how much debt is yours carrying and how much is ours carrying, and you know, what is, if we merge the business, who's going to lead this thing? Like who owns what share of it? And you've been the queen of the kingdom and I've been the king of the kingdom. So how are we going to get along and play in the sandbox together? Those are those are tricky, but we
Yeah.
do a lot of that too. And you know, if given the right opportunity, it can be accretive to value and valuation really, really quickly. So
Wow, and make the process so much more enjoyable because I have a business background, but the way you're so I understand what you're saying, but it is not the way I think I would have thought about it or approached it. I wouldn't have all the pieces in front of me the way that you're laying them out to make a really conscious and aligned decision for a long term game plan that has the outcome I'm looking for. So, gosh, I can definitely see the value of having an advisor with this type of game plan in place. Talk to me a little bit about the current M&A markets.
they're frothy. um, you know, So I think, last year, I think it's kind of important to rewind the tape a little bit because, um, pre-pandemic, uh, dentistry was it's always, healthcare services has always been in the top three sectors in terms of private equity interest, and it's been that way for multiple decades, and it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
change next year. So
Mm-hmm.
healthcare services is a really popular space where there's a lot of value creation opportunity for putting the right capital to the right use and generating the right returns. Dentistry
Mm-hmm.
is arguably still the most popular space within all of healthcare services. So I think what we saw globally on M&A going into COVID was quite a challenge because it was all pencils down. When the businesses returned, nobody knew what the revenue streams were going to be. Nobody knew how to forecast profitability from there. Would they
Mm-hmm.
return to 100% levels or less or more due to pent-up demand? What would happen? And it was tough for people to really understand, okay, I'm still interested in this space, but I have no idea how to value it. And
Mm-hmm.
so um, what we saw was those businesses that transacted shortly after, or during or shortly after COVID, were too far in. The acquirer had invested too much money in due diligence to back out of it, and it was still the right acquisition at the right time. Then, but during 2020, um, you had sort of the perfect storm as we turned into 2021. You had uh, people in the business development offices of private equity groups or enterprise level DSOs that were forced to sit on the sidelines for a year
Mm-hmm.
because there was no activity. And that's like having a bunch of like hungry dogs in their cage that you haven't fed for a long time. They get motivated to do deals, and a lot of their incentive comp is equity based for value creation. And when there's no
Mm-hmm.
transactions, they're not making bonuses, they're not making money, and they're a little bit upside down on their equity. So all of a sudden the market comes back and you release the hounds, like Smither, or as Mr. Burns would say on The Simpsons, release the hounds. You release the hounds into the marketplace, and you give them dirt cheap cost of capital because the Fed funds rate was all but zero. So borrowing
Mm-hmm.
rates and using debt leverage was free, for lack,
Mm-hmm.
not really, but closest thing to it, right? And then the third thing was you had a change politically in the administration with a totally different bent on what taxes were going to be, especially around long-term cap gains, which was a significant motivator to the people who'd built successful businesses to sell those businesses and avoid a 20% delta on the tax impact. You put all that into a blender, turn it on high, and put the lid on it, and you got what we got in 2021, right? And
Uh-huh.
globally, it was the most incredible year for M&A that the world's ever seen. So coming
Mm-hmm.
out of that, where do we find ourselves? Well, maybe the government overheated the economy a little bit. Like, who knew? 3 rounds of stimulus, we got inflation. You know, I, I, I can't spell economics, and I probably could have told you that, right? But
Uh-huh.
so we got that piece, plus we got the piece that due to the volume of M&A activity, there has to be some period of integration or digesting of the businesses that you've acquired, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the hard work happens on the operational side after we spike the football and talk about the transaction. But then you have like, how
Right.
do the businesses actually integrate into the core business, and are we getting cost synergies and revenue generation and all the other promise of bigger, more efficient businesses? That doesn't happen overnight. And so what you saw in the first half of the year is that there were a lot of enterprise level DSOs that acquired a lot of businesses, and they were having to sort through all of them, and
Mm-hmm.
literally the ops teams were saying, we got to pump the brakes, guys. We can't just keep buying more businesses. Somebody's got to do the hard work. And the volume of businesses that were sold in the last year kind of cleaned out a lot of those that were ready to exit. So this year, M&A activity has been down comparatively, but it's like coming off of an all-time high. Does that mean the market is down? No. Does it mean that valuation multiples and strategies and opportunities are down? Absolutely not. We just closed a pretty major transaction on Monday of this week with a orthodontic group in Florida and a well-regarded and well-known private equity group. It's going to be a great story of version 2.0 for both of them, and I can't wait to see it happen. So, you know, the best businesses are still commanding the highest premium from the most qualified buyers, and that's going to be the way it is for quite a while. Now, lending rates are going up, but private equity groups and private equity backed enterprise level groups are still awash in cash. And it's just a matter of how they want to deploy that cash if they're not going to use as much debt leverage to do it. So, I think the other aspect of this is the supply side, which was the people who were trying to sell their businesses before potentially there was going to be an income rate impact,
Mm-hmm.
and that is those that are operating successful businesses right now. They have a real uh, decision to kind of make on their hands. Are they going to continue to build their businesses and chase more EBITDA and more locations and reach a higher level of valuation at some point in the future, a year or two, sometime down the road? Or do they take a second look and say, I could probably create a greater outcome financially for me and my family if I did a transaction now and we're able to grow the business more quickly with the backing of a private equity group versus using debt funds and doing it on my own. And I think that's kind of a secondary inflection point where we see ourselves and what you're gonna see more M&A activity through the balance of the calendar year. And we think there's still a good couple of years to go on that. And I think that's the kind of the challenging one when we talk with a prospective client on the sell side advisory side of our business and they say, should I go to market now or should I wait? It's not an
Right.
easy answer. We kind of need to get under the hood and find out what that entrepreneur wants, where they're situated now, what the potential upsides are that he or she can create versus some of the known entities that we know in the industry on what they could collaborate on. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a deeper answer. Sorry to go a little long, wonky and long-winded on that, but it's
No, it's
complicated, I guess.
perfect. Yeah, no, it has to be. Otherwise, like you said, it'd just be McDonald's. What before I let you go, what other components have I not asked you about that you feel like would be important for this conversation?
I think we could take just a quick second and talk about the associate conundrum because that
Mm-hmm.
is still the biggest problem in any group. It doesn't matter if you're, two locations or 1,502 locations. The turnover of associates is still I think the biggest problem or the biggest challenge, let me put it that way,
Mm-hmm.
of building a group. And I think from our perspective, we believe that dentists are to a great degree entrepreneurially minded and they're predisposed to want to be owners, to have a seat at the table, to have a stake in the outcome, to have a say, a voice, to be heard. You know, that a lot of people advocated that they go to dental school versus going to medical school where they would end up being part of a hospital network,
Right.
and I think
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be said there. And so when you talk about building a group and building it through associates, it's not just a matter of plugging a gap. I mean, I'm sure you see this in some of the work that you do with clients where if the culture isn't strong, there's less adhesion across the board, associates and staff alike. But when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about associates, you need to have a holistic solution. And the holistic solution begins on the recruiting side of it. So, what makes you different in your group practice, dental practice, or whatever than anybody else who's trying to attract that associate. So,
Mm-hmm.
why are you different? And it can't be a clinical compensation rate, right? Because that's fungible. It's got to be something more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's how do you differentiate yourself at the point of recruiting? The second thing is if they do say yes and they are going to come work for you, what is their first, couple of weeks to couple of months look like? This could be their first job, or they could
Mm-hmm.
be spinning out of an associateship that failed. So they're coming into it with a degree of anxiety that they're not going to tell you about. So how do you get inside their mind and say, look, we think we built a really good group. Here's what working for us looks like. Here's what your first week to 2 weeks to 12 weeks is going to look like on the job. Here's your onboarding plan. I mean, I hate to say it, this is kind of corporate America, right? I mean, you create clarity for an associate, and if they can see themselves being successful in it, then they're more apt to say, okay, that feels comfortable and I want to be a part of it. And then the third piece is development. Again, most associates are young. They may be out of school or residency or out of their first failed associateship, but they want to be a master at their craft. They want to learn more expanded clinical procedures, and they want to get better. So who's their mentor? And the first 2 or 3 years working with you, what are investments you're going to make in them, time wise
Mm-hmm.
and financially, to say at the end of your second year you ought to be able to know how to do X, Y, and Z procedures. And in the third year, we're going to teach you how to do A, B, and C. And now they see themselves improving and getting better. And if they do more complicated dentistry, they're going to earn more income, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a closed in solution in terms of doctor development, clinical skill development. And then the last piece is, hey, if you fit with the culture, if you take good care of the staff and the patients, and if you're a team player, here's how you become a partner. We have a
Mm-hmm.
buy-in methodology or an earn-in methodology where you can earn equity in the business. You can become a partner. You can own part of the company. You can sit at the table with us and help us grow it. You have a vested interest in the outcome we're all creating. And that partnership track can be a buy-in if that's the right thing, or it could be an earned in model. We have a couple called profits interest units and restricted stock units that are, I won't bore your audience with that, at least not verbally, but you can find out more stuff on our website on it. But it's there are ways for an associate to earn real equity in a business without actually having to buy it, because they're all carrying like 300 grand worth of debt. So they may
Right.
not want to buy in right away, but they want to be an owner in the business. So if you can solve for the recruiting, onboarding, development, and partnership track as a holistic solution, you can build a world beater business that will attract associates to come work for you, not just when you have one of them quit and you got to go recruit them.
Really, and it hits home with what you were talking about early on about, from this perspective, it's the founder, the CEO having clarity around what exactly am I building, and then just being really straightforward with that, because you don't actually want the wrong associates, and you don't want a reputation of attracting people and then not delivering on what they thought they were getting. And some of that's going to be the associates asking the right questions. Some of that's going to be the presentation of the opportunity. But I love what you're saying here, and I find it so, so valuable, because then in the end, we're trying to create that unity. We're trying to create that adhesiveness you spoke about. And the only way to do that is to have the right people with the right organization.
Yeah, culture matters, or I mean, I think it should. And the maybe it depends on who you ask, but I
Well,
know
if
that.
retention matters, culture matters.
Yeah, right. I mean, building a business that plans for 10 to 20% turnover is uh, it's not a business I want to build. Let me put it that way. But
Right.
I think if you're clear about that, and not to be not to over generalize things, but for millennials, it matters a lot. And we've hired a handful of younger people on our data and analytics team, and in the interview process, I usually get to them at sort of the tail end of the interview process, and two of them recently on separate occasion asked me, how would you describe the culture of Polaris? And I
Mm-hmm.
kind of thought, good on you for asking that question, and shame on me for not being proactive in telling you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it matters to them even if it doesn't matter to you. And that's a broad generalization that your audience can take to the bank. But if you build a business with a tighter, more contiguous culture, and you retain associates, it's better for continuity of care with patients for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
also much better for continuity of cash flows. And that's the business you're trying to build.
Absolutely. When I'm talking to people who are either who have left a job or are considering leaving a job, um, by and large, if I were to summarize what is the collective concern, it's my perception of my experience at work, which can be really clarified on the forefront.
Yeah, it's scary, right? It's not what
Mhm.
you did to them, it's what they perceived. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, that corporate America is rife with that too. So,
Very much. Well, listen, if people want to learn more, you've said so many good things. I'm sure sparked a lot of interest and raised a lot of eyebrows on some things that they're going to want to know more about. How do we get in touch with Polaris?
well, thanks for the opportunity to be with you and your audience today. I truly appreciate it. Uh, so our website is www.polarishealthcarepartners.com. I like to say that when we were launching the business, we searched for the longest unclaimed URL, and I think we found it. So, but
Way to go.
polarishealthcarepartners.com. You can learn a lot more about us, all the things we do, where we'll be appearing, speaking events and things like that. We have a podcast ourselves called Group Practice Accelerator. And a lot of the stuff we talked about today, we talk about on there. It's pretty good business information. It's granular. It's a little bit wonky, but people tend to like it. And then there's also a place where they can book a call with me off the website if they want to talk about anything one-on-one or want
Okay,
to dig into any aspect of their business. I probably take between 5 and 10 prospective client calls a week. So happy to
great.
happy to share time whenever and wherever I can.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Perrin. This was actually very educational for me as well. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure being with you. Really, I look forward to it, Chelsea. Congratulations on the business you built as well, and look forward to having you on our show at some point too.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
I appreciate you joining me for today's episode. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit dentallife.coach for access to additional coaching tools, as well as more episodes to help you create the dental life you truly desire.